Tēnā koutou katoa maloa lei, te lofa lava, te loha ni, ki ora nā, whakalofa lahe atu, namaste, nisibula, and warm Pacific greetings to you all. My name is Hamish McDougall, and as the Executive Director of the New Zealand Institute of International Affairs, it's a great pleasure to welcome you here this evening. A special welcome to Your Excellencies, Heads of Mission, other members of the Diplomatic Corps, members of the NZIIA, including some of our life members and board members here tonight, and all other guests, including those from throughout the Pacific region. Nau mai, haere mai. Tonight marks a significant waypoint for the Institute to publish a special report looking at international politics in the Pacific, navigating geostrategic competition. And before handing over to the experts here on this topic, I just want to explain a little bit about how this project came about and where we might head next. Now, as most of you know, the Institute's remit is to foster discussion and understanding of international affairs as they relate to New Zealand. And with this in mind, there are a couple of motivations for the Institute to do this work. Firstly, our surveys show that the Pacific is a region of the world that our members and other stakeholders most want to learn about. And perhaps more importantly than that, the Pacific's also a fundamentally significant region for New Zealand foreign policy and its national interests. For decades now, New Zealand's been describing itself as a Pacific nation, prioritising stability and prosperity in the region as a key objective. It is what the late Terence O'Brien called New Zealand's near abroad. And apart from pockets elsewhere, it's perhaps the only region where this country's foreign policy truly resonates. And in much more recent developments, at least in part caused by the geostrategic competition between the United States and China, but also other issues such as the effects of climate change, the region is now the focus of a great deal of attention from external actors, both state and non-state actors. And although, as we'll hear shortly, I think some of this attention isn't always translating into improved outcomes for Pacific countries and their peoples. Despite the clear importance of the Pacific region to New Zealand, it's perhaps surprising that there's relatively little research analysis and Track 2 activity underway in the Pacific foreign policy space in New Zealand, certainly relative to some other parts of the world, including Asia. So with all of this in mind, we endeavoured to bring together a group of experts from Pacific countries, New Zealand and Australia, for a 2-day workshop in Auckland earlier this year. And this was made possible with thanks to generous funding from the Pacific Cooperation Foundation and Conrad Adenauer Stiftung. And it sought views on some of the key issues related to the topic, including who the external actors are, what they're doing, and what New Zealand can do to respond. The workshop and the resulting report are part of the Institute's own journey, I think, to foster knowledge and understanding of international affairs in the Pacific, and we hope to pick this up with further activity in the new year, including at our national conference, which will be in Wellington on the 12th of June. So I'm very pleased to say we've got several of the experts who are at the workshop here to speak to you today. We have Karen Rangi, ONZM, who moderated the workshop and whom I'll shortly pass over to chair this event. Karen is one of New Zealand's top governance professionals, currently chair of Pacific Home Care, deputy chair of Pacific Cooperation Broadcasting Limited, and on the boards of Massey University, Te Papa, amongst other organisations. Also joining us from nearest to furthest, we have Anna Powles, Associate Professor at Massey University's Centre for Defence and Security Studies. Many of you will know Anna as a leading expert in geopolitical dynamics in the Pacific, including security architecture and New Zealand foreign and defence policy. And we're also pleased to have Dr. Iati from Te Hiranawaka Victoria University of Wellington here too, a senior lecturer and Pacific Security Fellow at the Centre for Strategic Studies. Iati's research and taught widely on geopolitical competition, governance, development and democracy in the Pacific. And we've also got Guy Fiti Sinclair, who's Associate Professor at the Auckland Law School and has done such a fantastic job in drafting the report based on the workshop. So there's a lot to get through. Shortly, I'll hand over to Karen Rangi, who will introduce Deputy Secretary General of the Pacific Island Forum, Esala Nayasi, who is joining us online from Suva, and we're very honoured to have him delivering the opening address. So I'll introduce Karen, and you can take it from here. Thank you.
Kia ora tātou katoa, and in recognition of Papua New Guinea Pidgin Language Week, halo ologeta, and lovely to see you all here today. I've just done that very Kiwi thing where you cringe when your name is in the same sentence as the word expert, so I'm just getting that out there. Because my role in this wonderful piece of work was to be sort of one of the conductors of a 15-strong orchestra of real experts sitting to my left, who came together to produce the report that we're talking about today. So thank you very much to Hamish and the NZIIA team for making this space this evening. My first job is to introduce and welcome, as Hamish said, Deputy Secretary General for Strategic Policy and Planning, Mr. Esala Nayasi, who is joining us this evening to reflect and discuss the view of the Pacific Islands Forum on how they would like external actors to engage in the Pacific, and including some discussion on the 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent. Bula Vinaka, Deputy Secretary General, it's wonderful to have you here with us, and we'll hand it over to you now.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope you're able to hear me.
Loud and clear.
Your Excellencies, distinguished panelists, colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen. Bula Vinaka, kia ora, halo olgeta. And thank you for the invitation for me to join you all this afternoon. It is a privilege to sit among such a distinguished panel, and one who that is familiar with the issues that we are all here to discuss today. In saying so, let me congratulate Guy Sinclair and those that have helped in the formulation of the report that we are here to discuss this afternoon. And thank you for the initiative and for this opportunity for us to be here today. I'm confident that we can all appreciate and agree that while we enjoy much geographical isolation, the Pacific region of 2024 is very much a crowded and contested geostrategic space, that is. For a number of reasons, global powers vie for influence in our region with our governments and over our people. As these interests intensify, so does our need to uphold our strategic vision, our strategic voice, and our strategic priorities in all our engagements and interactions. Acting in this manner requires a common vision, and indeed, we have that in the 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent that serves as our blueprint to prosperous, safe, and healthy region. The 2050 strategy sets out our leaders' vision and their priorities for our people. Primary amongst those are managing climate change, maintaining peace and security, growing economic development, and continuing to develop our children and our people. Acting in this manner also requires solidarity and unity amongst the members of our foreign family, which New Zealand is part of. And while all families have their challenges from time to time, I believe that as Pacific people, we have our core values that are essential features of solidarity and unity within our forum. The common vision, the solidarity and unity are the cornerstone of what will keep us together as a region during these geostrategic dynamics that are at play. Building on our common vision and foundational solidarity and unity, there are many ways in which we can ensure that our partners engage with us on our terms, through our processes, and in genuine alignment to our priorities. I know that the report highlights a number of ways in which that might be done, and I look forward to the panel's discussion on those issues today. For the Pacific Islands Forum, there are three ongoing initiatives that reflect the political desire to ensure that our partners genuinely align themselves to the things that matter to us in the Pacific. The first is the review of the regional architecture, and that is currently ongoing. As many of us will recall, that review had focused on partnership engagement, both at a political and also at a technical level. And at the heart of this is the desire to better manage and dialogue and engagement that our leaders have with our partners. It is no longer acceptable to our leaders to engage and entertain partners who do not support and align to our priorities or our vision. We need to incentivize these partners to better engage with us, and we need to put in place proper accountabilities for our partnerships. There need to be real consequences for those partners who do not align to our priorities, and there are some diplomatic levers that we must use to preserve our authority as a region. We have begun the work on the review of the Pacific Islands Forum Partnership and Engagement Mechanism, which will reorient how partners are considered and treated when it comes to engagement with a collective forum family. The second initiative, ladies and gentlemen, that I would like to highlight is the Pacific Resilience Facility, our very own Pacific-led, owned, and managed community-centered facility that is designed to ensure that issues of access to climate finance, loss and damage, and security are addressed effectively. Climate change, as you know, is the single greatest existential threat before us as a region. We have made our voices heard on the challenges that we face with the multilateral system, and accessing global climate finance remains an issue, particularly for those of our leaders, ministers, and our colleagues who are in Baku, Azerbaijan this week and the next. We are not sitting on our laurels, waiting for the multilateral system to adapt. We have introduced our own regional mechanism, and we inviting all partners and global financial institutions to demonstrate their commitment to the region through this established mechanism. And in saying so, we would like to express our gratitude to the Government of New Zealand for committing $20 million towards the Pacific Resilience Facility. Ladies and gentlemen, the third initiative that I wish to speak on today is the Ocean of Peace concept. And while this is still in its formative stages, this concept will, at its essence, set out principles for how our partners engage in the region. The concept is particularly geared to ensure that our partners respect our principles with regards to peace and to security, that there is respect for the rule of law, for sovereignty, and ultimately for our agency and our place in the Pacific. Our role as a Forum Secretariat, together with the unwavering commitment of our member countries, is to ensure that such initiatives are developed and implemented in a way that reflects our leaders' political vision when it comes to asserting our will and our agency in our region, in our place. Ultimately, our strength lies in our unity, and so our ability to manage and navigate our way through these present geostrategic times will rest on the strength and depth of that unity, whether calm or stormy seas. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen and guests, in saying that, let me say Vinakavagalevu again to all of you for this opportunity for me to present or to speak to you this afternoon and I wish your dialogue well, and I thank you for this opportunity and for this great initiative by the Institute in keeping our discussions and our dialogue alive, particularly on issues that concerns our people.
Vinaka Vakalevu, Deputy Secretary General, thank you very much for your contribution and for laying the foundation and some challenge for our discussion today as we reflect on the report, and wish you and your organisation well. It's my pleasure next to have an opportunity for us all to hear a summary of the report from the author. So Guy Fiti Sinclair is our third panellist sitting down the end there, and Guy was the rapporteur for our two-day session of gathering together thoughts, ideas that have formed this report that's in front of you. So I'd like you to welcome Guy to the podium to give us the good oil on the report. Guy.
Kia ora koutou, talo whalawa, halo olgeta, avinuntu olgeta. I greet you in Te Reo Māori, of course, but also the languages of my Pacific heritage. I whakapapa to the villages of Satalo and Sapali'i in Samoa, and I was born and raised in Papua New Guinea, so it's a real pleasure to be here this evening and to present a summary of this report. I'd like to begin by thanking the New Zealand Institute for International Affairs for this opportunity, for the opportunity to attend the symposium and to write the report, and in particular to Hamish, as well as the sponsors of the symposium that Hamish mentioned in his opening remarks. The report is an attempt to synthesize the views of 15 experts that attended that symposium back in July, including the people sitting here. And I'd like to acknowledge and thank those experts who attended that symposium. The report takes a broadly Pacific-centered approach to analyzing international politics in the region. So that obviously reflects the attitudes and interests of the experts who participated in the symposium. But I should emphasize that the experts didn't all see everything in exactly the same way. It's natural that there will be differences of opinion and perspective when discussing the Pacific region, given its vastness, its diversity, its complexity. And the report tries to reflect that diversity of perspectives to the extent possible. So, in the remainder of this brief talk, I'd like to address three topics. First, how are external actors currently engaged in the Pacific? Second, what kind of engagement do Pacific countries seek or want to see from external actors? And third, how can Aotearoa New Zealand better engage with the Pacific while respecting the agency and autonomy of Pacific peoples, states, and regional institutions? So to begin with, how are external actors currently engaging in the Pacific? Well, in recent years, external engagements in the Pacific have rapidly expanded, resulting in intensifying geostrategic competition and a degree of disruption to existing relations among countries in the region. To a significant extent, this competition has centered on China's growing presence in the Pacific. But how exactly to characterize that presence is itself a matter of perspective. To some people, China has aggressively sought to displace the traditional partners of Pacific countries, offering large investments in return for political support and possibly military advantage. To others, China has merely stepped into a vacuum created by the lack of interest of Western metropolitan states and has offered a more attractive development model based on trade and infrastructure without the strings of neoliberal conditionalities attached. And of course, there are views in between and combining these positions. Whatever the motives or the modalities, countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Japan, Australia, New Zealand have responded to China's increased presence by, in turn, increasing their own diplomatic, military, and economic activities in the region. But these are not the only actors engaged in the region. A number of other new state actors are becoming increasingly active in the Pacific, ranging from Indonesia, India, South Korea, to Germany, Norway, even Israel. There's also a rising number of non-state actors, from the traditional UN agencies and the Asian Development Bank to the European Union, to multinational corporations like Google, to philanthropic foundations like the Bezos Earth Fund and the Waite Foundation. And all these state and non-state actors interact in a variety of complicated ways, contributing to the complexity of political relationships in the region. How external actors are engaged in the region has also changed. In the area of security, we see a proliferating range of Pacific-centered and Indo-Pacific-centered strategies being produced, dozens of security agreements being entered into between individual Pacific countries and external actors over the last few years, new diplomatic postings being created, and a whole range of increasing activity in state and military visits and meetings of political leaders and officials. Particular areas of security engagement have grown in salience in recent years, including humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, partnerships to address transnational crime, and maritime security. And each of these has itself become a site of competition and politicization. Flows of aid and development assistance are also used as instruments of geopolitical competition, posing additional demands and challenges for Pacific countries. And a lot of this has been directed towards infrastructure development, while spending on health and education has declined in relative terms. The proportion of aid directed towards climate adaptation and mitigation has grown steadily, but still remains much too low, lower than needed. In short, much of this increase in activity has been targeted towards serving the strategic interests of external powers rather than Pacific peoples. These external interactions, these external engagements are not necessarily resulting in enhanced social, economic, security, or environmental outcomes for individual Pacific countries or the region as a whole. So what kinds of engagement do Pacific countries seek? So we've already heard from the Deputy Secretary General of the Pacific Islands Forum, so I can be brief here. We've heard about the 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific. We've heard about the focuses on climate, on peace and security, on economic development, on the desire for a common vision, solidarity, and unity, and the three ongoing issues that the Deputy Secretary General mentioned: the review of the partnership and engagement framework of the Pacific Islands Forum, the Pacific Resilience Facility, and the Ocean of Peace concept. I'll note here that some external actors have started to adopt the language of the Blue Pacific and of the 2050 strategy produced by the Pacific Islands Forum. But there are reasons to worry that these references amount to little more than lip service or maybe blue washing of geostrategic ambitions. In our group of experts meeting earlier in the year, we were also conscious that there are a number of significant differences among countries in the Pacific that we should not lose sight of. So we saw some of those differences arise a few years ago with the threatened withdrawal of Micronesian members from the Pacific Islands Forum. There are a variety of historical and ongoing links between various external actors and particular Pacific Island countries, which have the potential to create or exacerbate gaps and inequalities. Not every Pacific nation shares the same concerns, whether that has to do with development, security, or climate. And there are a number of existing and emerging issues that threaten to divide the region, such as the issue of deep-sea mining, logging, and illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing. So, with all that in mind, how can Aotearoa New Zealand better engage with the Pacific? Well, New Zealand has long imagined and described itself as a Pacific nation, in part because of its geographical position as an island state in the Pacific, and in part because of its colonial history and connections to a number of Pacific countries, but perhaps more fundamentally due to the genealogical and historical links between Tangata Whenua and Tangata Pasifika, both within Aotearoa New Zealand and around the wider region. Recent governments have sought to build on those strengths, for example, through the Pacific Reset and Pacific Resilience frameworks. Yet, despite those strengths, there remains some dangers that we in New Zealand misread or misunderstand the messages that we receive from Pacific countries. Paternalistic attitudes towards Pacific countries run deep and are difficult to displace and pose a continuing challenge to the success of New Zealand's engagements in the region. An important area of potential weakness is the mismatch between New Zealand's rhetoric and its actions in relation to climate, which Pacific Island countries are very aware of. And another area of sensitivity, of course, has to do with the evolving relationships between Pacific countries and China. So the 15 experts gathered at the symposium in July produced a series of recommendations for New Zealand to improve its engagements in and with the Pacific region, and I'll just close by summarizing those recommendations. First, the current turbulence, geopolitical turbulence in the region provides an opportunity to recast relationships. New Zealand can differentiate itself by acting in ways that avoid competitive frameworks and seek to build on the country's existing strengths. However, humility will be required here to recognize that gaining a deeper understanding of the Pacific requires developing further intellectual, expert, and cultural capacities here at home. And in this connection, existing social networks and traditional knowledge in the Tangata Pasifika diaspora offer vital keys that can be leveraged to build stronger relationships with Pacific countries. Second, recasting relations with the region means recognizing that not all Pacific countries have the same needs and interests, and we need to better tailor our engagements accordingly. Third, New Zealand should continue to contribute to regional security as defined by Pacific countries and by the Pacific Islands Forum. Fourth, we have an opportunity to build better expertise, people-to-people and civil society links using both governmental and non-governmental channels. Fifth, New Zealand should support the review of the Pacific Island, should continue to support the review of the Pacific Island Forum's mechanisms for engaging with external actors, which the Deputy Secretary General mentioned. And sixth and finally, the New Zealand government should seek opportunities to proactively engage with issues of strategic salience to Pacific countries. Again, the Deputy Secretary General mentioned the Pacific Resilience Framework, but we can think of a number of other important sort of homegrown initiatives that New Zealand could do well to support. So I'll stop there. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions, and there's lots in the report that I haven't mentioned, but I'd like to thank again the New Zealand Institute for International Affairs, and thank you for your attention and your interest.
Thank you, Guy. And so Guy's given us a really clear articulation of the scope of the report and the 6 identified actions and messages for New Zealand from the work that was put together at the symposium. So we're going to take the opportunity to hear from our panel members their key reflections, thoughts resulting from the work. And just to say, we'll have some time hearing from them, and then there'll be an opportunity to hear your questions from the floor as well. So I'm going to open it up to Iati Tālafa. Great to have you here. So your key thoughts, reflections, reactions to how the report has come together and what it's saying.
Can you hear me? All right, very good. We're good. All right, great, thanks. So I was asked to just kind of fill in the gaps from Guy's speech, but as a good Manu Samoa former player, Guy never leaves any gaps in the defence. So there's not much to work with. But I would like to pick up on one point which I think I can expand on, and that is talking about external actors and what their strategic interests are in this region. Often we talk about it very generally, like all of them have similar interests, strategic interests, security interests in the region. But I think we need to be a little bit more clear and sophisticated as in terms of what each actor is looking for in this region. I don't want to group every actor into the same category because I think it's unfair for them and I think it's unhelpful for the Pacific because we need to be clear as to what actor is actually after. And in doing so, I think we also have to be careful about projecting onto certain actors what we ourselves end up doing or have done in the past. I found the comments of a prominent Tongan journalist at the recent CHOGM meeting quite interesting. I'm not sure if you picked up on a very prominent Tongan journalist who spoke at CHOGM, and he said it's interesting that we're being told that China is this dangerous actor when those who have bombed the Pacific with nuclear weapons, colonized the Pacific, committed assassinations, have all been part of the Western group. And now they're trying to tell us to be afraid of China. And I thought his comments were very interesting because it struck to the core of what I think a lot of Pacific Islanders see but don't often say, is that a lot of the threats that we're projecting onto China is really the threats that have come out of our own experience in this region. So I think we have to be careful in terms of identifying and picking up on what the strategies are that different actors are using in this region. I always like to ask the question of who exactly is driving this strategic competition, because as Guy did mention, there was a time when this region wasn't very popular, post-Cold War in 1990s. We talk about it in the context of benign neglect or strategic neglect, and that's when obviously China's position in the region picked up, it rose to prominence. And so you could argue that it was just simply filling a vacuum or perhaps giving an alternative to Pacific Island countries who are a little bit tired from the encroaching nature of Western policies vis-a-vis or in the form of neoliberal policies that were being pushed on the region around the 1990s. So I think we have to be careful about identifying who exactly is pushing the strategic competition in this region. And then we have to ask the question, are these strategic policies that each actor is pushing in the region, to what extent do they benefit, harm, or help the Pacific Islands country? I'm often told that China is engaging in debt trap diplomacy in this region. It's something I've not found too much evidence to support. I think the worst case scenario we've identified is Tonga, but even there the Chinese had to renegotiate the financial terms with the Tongans twice to kind of help them out. I think it's dangerous to kind of deploy these kind of threat narratives because ultimately many Pacific Island countries, in case people didn't know, are underdeveloped and need a lot of this financial assistance. And to frame this financial assistance in these threat narratives may not be particularly helpful for them. Now, that's not to say there aren't any issues. You simply have to go to some of these Pacific Island countries to see who dominates the business sector to understand the role of, I guess, a lot of Chinese businesses in taking over this particular sector in Pacific Island countries. But again, in saying that, we have to be careful that we're, clear as to what is actually helping and hurting the Pacific, and not just trying to project onto a particular actor certain threats that we ourselves have been guilty of. My last point is also, I think we have to consider strategies that could be helpful to the Pacific in terms of win-win situations. I think there's been a lot of opportunities that have been missed by Western countries in the over a century of dealing with this region, where they could have really implemented policies that would benefit the Pacific as well as benefit them. And here I'm talking specifically about infrastructure development. It's a no-brainer that Pacific Island countries have some of the richest natural resources in the world. You just go to Melanesia and you have gold, copper, nickel, forestry, etc. And yet it baffles me that they have some of the lowest GDP per capita in the world when they should be some of the richest. And I don't think it takes a genius to work out they've never had the infrastructure to exploit their natural resources for their own good. But oddly enough, when multinational corporations go in there, they do tend to find an infrastructure that helps them exploit these countries. So I think there are policies we could have put in a long time ago that could have ended up being beneficial to the region as well as beneficial to our interests in the West. But perhaps we never considered them, or perhaps we just overlooked them as not relevant for our own interests. So I think those are the only things I could pick up from Guy's presentation that I could add to.
Thank you, Iati. A few things there that we could get into some good conversations about afterwards. I'm going to pass over now to Anna. It's the same thing. Your key reflections, thoughts, reactions, now that you've seen the report together and heard the summary from Guy.
Kia ora. Thank you, Karen. And just to quickly acknowledge the DSG, if he's still here as well, and thanks to NZAA. Just a couple of comments that I would make, and I've sort of listed them in accordance with the questions that you put out. But I'd just like to start off by saying that, firstly, I think NZAA and Guy for his work here are to be commended for really lifting the conversation about the Pacific and Aotearoa's relationship with the Pacific, which really hasn't had as much attention as we would assume it would. And I'll return to that in a second. The second point I would make is that what came through really clearly from both the report and the workshop was the importance of understanding the way in which national interest across the region is driving policy and the challenges that is going to, the challenges that will create in the years and decades to come as we become increasingly resource constrained, as increased tensions emerge within the broader Asia Pacific, and increased militarization and so forth. And that's a challenge for multilateral organizations like the Pacific Islands Forum, particularly, and that's one of the reasons why New Zealand has adopted this Pacific centrality framing, which both serves the purpose for New Zealand but also seeks to channel external interest to the forum specifically, rather than a more scattergun approach that we've seen since around 2015. The other point I would make too is that we also need to really appreciate that whilst all this external activity is taking place and we have a wide range of actors re-engaging, from the obvious ones being the United States re-engaging with the region, right through to Saudi Arabia engaged in a little bit of greenwashing and so forth, and everyone in between. And that poses enormous challenges for the region and for countries in the region who have very different relationships with these countries. But I have certainly found through my research that Pacific countries are successfully leveraging this external interest in order to meet their own development and particularly security needs. And this is something that we discussed a great deal at the workshop as well. The other point that I would make too is that with all of this external interest, and both the DSG touched on this and Esala, and Guy as well, is the importance of guardrails in the region. And we've seen how challenging that has been in Southeast Asia to establish guardrails, but it is fundamentally important that the forum is able to do that and have member support. And this is where the national interest piece is going to be really, really interesting. But to establish guardrails to effectively manage external engagement and manage potential conflict down the track, or at least heightened tensions down the track. The other point that I would make is about Aotearoa's position in all of this. And I think when the reset was launched in 2018, it was an opportunity to also reflect on the relationships that this country has, both internally, both domestically, but also across the region. Very different relationships across the region. But I would suggest that perhaps that opportunity to really reflect on those relationships, on how they're conducted, was actually not undertaken and certainly not pursued to the degree that I think it would have been actually useful to have done so. And I think obviously 2018 pandemic then happens, and there has been a great deal sort of policy on the run taking place across the region, not just New Zealand, but we see it out of Canberra as well, and other countries where there's this policy dash to the Pacific. But what we've lost in that are some deeper conversations about whether or not Aotearoa is engaging in a way which is actually reflective of how we supposedly and hopefully see ourselves as part of the region, but also reflecting on how countries across the Pacific also see us, and being ready and willing to be uncomfortable with some of those truths, which I think that we would discover. And very much, and lastly, I would just say that with respect to the strategic competition in the region, which we really saw start to pick up around 2012, 2014, whilst in part it was, there was an element of certainly benign neglect on the part of Australia and New Zealand, but I'm sort of a bit uncomfortable with that phrase. But it was also in recognition of Pacific countries pursuing their own relationships externally. And part of that was in response to a frustration about the role that Australia and New Zealand played in the Pacific Islands Forum in terms of pursuing a very Canberra-Wellington agenda. And I think we need to really acknowledge the fact that diplomacy has shifted and changed in the region over the past 15 or so years, and is continuing to do so. And so the question for New Zealand is it ready? Does it sufficiently understand? Do we have the necessary knowledge, skills, language, etc., to be able to understand what the region is going to look like in 10, 15, 20 years? Because it's going to be markedly different from what it is now. So I will just finish there and hand back to Aotearoa. Thank you.
Thank you to you both for adding a bit more flesh around the context for the issues that are reflected here in the report. I wanted to come to, I guess, the report culminates in 6 suggestions around how New Zealand can better engage with the Pacific. So I'm interested to hear from each of you, just in terms of those suggestions, where do you think we can get the best traction or the best success in terms of those suggestions that were put? And I'm going to start with you, Guy. Having been very conscious we didn't talk about this question, so...
So the particular recommendations?
You can pick anyone you like, but I'm interested in where you think we can get the best traction in terms of better engagement by New Zealand with the Pacific.
Well, so I'm an international lawyer by trade, and I focus on international organisations, and so I'll speak from my bias, as it were.
Sure.
But I really think that the best way forward for New Zealand and for Pacific Island countries is to develop that kind of solidarity that the Deputy Secretary General was mentioning through institutions, through institutional frameworks. And Pacific Islands Forum is obviously the leading political regional organisation. It's the obvious place to deal with some of these pressures, to channel them. Anna was saying, talking earlier about managing those external engagements, and that's part of the review as well. And I think that's would be best for Aotearoa New Zealand and best for Pacific countries to be building on that foundation. Without, of course, forgetting the wider institutional framework. There are global organizations that are active in the region, the UN organizations, the World Bank. There are other regional organizations that we work with, the Asian Development Bank and so on. But I think those specific regional organizations provide a really strong foundation that can be built upon going forward.
Thanks, Guy. Iati, how about you?
I'd just say that I think it's best for New Zealand to kind of try and stay out of these strategic competition. What exactly am I talking about here is, I don't know if you remember, there was a Week Pacific narrative came out, and it was really an effort the Blue Pacific narrative came out, and it was really an effort by the Pacific Island countries to say we don't want to bring strategic competitions into different areas of our engagement internationally. And not long after that, New Zealand joined the Partners in the Blue Pacific, which was a strategic cohort of aid donors with the United States, Japan, etc. And I thought to myself, well, did they not just hear the Pacific Island countries say, don't turn this, space into strategic competition? And here you go and join them. And so I followed this up, and I asked Penny Wong, at a meeting I was at, and I said, why did you join the PPP just when the Pacific said, don't turn this space into a strategic competition? And she said, well, it helps us to coordinate better with the other partners, which I thought was a really, lack of a better term, a pretty useless answer, because you could still coordinate with Japan, with Australia, Australia could still coordinate with Japan, New Zealand, etc., without having the Partners in the Blue Pacific grouping. But all they were doing was signaling to the Pacific that we're turning the aid space into this geopolitical strategic space. So as much as possible, I would say New Zealand has to decide, is it part of this Anglo-American Five Eyes partners who's going to engage in strategic competition on that side in the Pacific? Or is it part of the Pacific family who's going to engage with the Pacific and really identify and help and address the problems that Pacific Island countries have and need? That's probably where I'd start.
Thank you. Anna.
Iati and I might differ a little bit here. What I would just say, though, is that I think we also need to acknowledge that there are a range of countries in the region or who have come into the region, the immediate region, who have strategic concerns. Japan and South Korea are two who are top of mind, as well as Taiwan, obviously, as well. So this has spilled over, and yes, there have been multiple reports, whether it be the 2050 strategy, numerous speeches by Pacific leaders, the Pacific Security Outlook reports, and others who, and the Boy Declaration, of course, from 2018, who have all called for or sought to reject the premise of strategic competition in the region. Unfortunately, the reality is that it is here, and we have to find a way to deal with it. For Aotearoa, it's a question how to balance strategic interests and concerns with its relationships across the Pacific as well. And notwithstanding that, Pacific countries also have strategic concerns too. And we see that through the range of different opinions and statements that we hear, whether it be from Palau or from Papua New Guinea or from other parts of the region. And we saw how that impacted regionalism at the last Pacific Islands Forum over the issue around Taiwan being included in the statement around Taiwan in the communique. So those tensions are here, and hence the drive within the forum to have the Ocean of Peace concept and those principles adopted as forms of guardrails to manage external engagement, to manage potential heightened strategic competition. And unfortunately, with, as I've said before, competition for resources, competition for influence, for votes, and so forth is only going to become more challenging to manage. And so it's what we need to be having, and I think this is not a recommendation for this country, but for all, is more conversations. We need to be talking more and talking to each other as much as possible, even when we do have differing views. And that's, I think, fundamentally important.